Electrocast.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in places that could expose you to identity theft. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, their US-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit lifelock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
¿Hablas español?
Sprichst du Deutsch?
If you've heard that sound from Babbel before, I bet you do. Babbel is the science-backed language learning app that actually works. With quick 10-minute lessons handcrafted by over 200 language experts, Babbel gets you on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. With over 16 million subscriptions sold and a 20-day money-back guarantee, just start speaking another language with Babbel. Right now, up to 55% off your Babbel subscription at babbel.com/Spotify podcast. Spelled BABBEL.com/Spotify podcast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
There's a change happening in the way we live, the way we work, the way we spend our money and make our decisions. We are evolving to be more conscious in our actions in a way that serves the world and makes it a better place. Welcome to the Ethical Evolution. The Ethical Evolution podcast is brought to you by Ethical Change Agency. I'm Bindi, I'm the founder, and my mission is to help ethical entrepreneurs and holistic healers to find their voice through spiritual coaching and podcasting. I'm honoured to bring you the stories of those who create change through healing, kindness, innovation, purpose, and spirit. Understanding that to create collective change, we need to be the change. It all begins with us. Hey, before we get into this episode, I just wanted to let you know that you can now grab my album of guided meditations. It's called Sourced by Spirit, and it's on all streaming platforms, including Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, Tidal, YouTube Music, and many more. There's 11 guided meditations ranging from 4 minutes through to 10 minutes to help you reset your mind and your body at any time. Okay, now let's get on with the show. Lindsey Carnick is the owner-founder of Onward Psychological Services, a private practice psychotherapy firm. Lindsey seeks to help people who are suffering because they're living out storylines they didn't choose, don't like, or that aren't serving them anymore. People who want change, people who want something different for themselves in their lives. In our chat, we explore emotional intelligence, emotional regulation, understanding our feelings, stress, and anxiety. Welcome, Lindsey, to the Ethical Evolution.
Hi, Bindi. It's lovely to be here, and thank you for doing the work you're doing at your organization. That's pretty amazing.
Thank you so much for joining us. Now, for those people who don't know you and what you do, can you go ahead and tell us?
Sure. So mostly I'm just another walker on the path of the human experience that we're all having. And also professionally, I'm a therapist. I've been in practice for 15 years, and I work with adult individuals and couples. And when people ask me what I specialize in, it took me a long time to really figure out the truth of that answer. But the truth is I specialize in change. I deeply believe in change for people, internal change, external change. And if someone's interested in some kind of change, I'm interested. I'm hooked. I want to hear about it. And I want to know what is holding them up. And if they don't know, that's fine too. We'll figure it out. But anytime somebody's in state A and they want to be in another state, I'm hooked.
And well, we're an absolute perfect fit then if you're all about change and you're here with me. Absolute perfect fit.
I agree. I especially like the sound of ethical change. I hope all change is ethical, but I like the explicitness of ethical change.
Yeah, and listen, that's what this show is all about, is actually creating change one conversation at a time. And I know we've got so many paths we could go down today, but if we start with change, there's people who think they can't change. Particularly when it comes to their beliefs, their attitudes, their behaviours, those kind of things. But change is possible, isn't it?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Mm.
I've yet to meet a person, and look, I haven't met everybody by any stretch of the imagination, but I've yet to meet a person who is not capable of change.
Mm. And I know there's some people, particularly in my life, who will change for a very short time and then they'll go back to previous behaviours and those kind of things. But even underneath all that, there's still possibility for change. And do you think that people have to want to change?
Well, I think wanting change is a little bit of a misleading idea because change is hard and scary. And I would say even people who say, "Oh, I like change," I'm not sure about that. I mean, some people are more adaptable to change than others. I think the question is not do people want to change, because change is a scary concept in general. The question is, do you want something different than what you have now? Now, change is usually a necessary mechanism. It's sort of the train between Denver and Boston, state A, state B. The important thing is not do you want to change, because most people don't, because change is hard, scary. The question is, do you want something different for yourself or for somebody else in your life? Your reasons for wanting something different can be all over the place. It doesn't actually matter, but you have to want something different before you can be amenable to change, as difficult as it is.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Now, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about today, and it's a term that gets thrown around a lot nowadays, particularly in workplaces, and a lot of people don't know what it means, but they think they do, and that is what we call EQ, or emotional intelligence. And some people will throw it around like, oh, you've got no emotional intelligence, and you're like, wait, what? As a therapist and in the work that you do, can you explain to us what is that and what does it mean?
Well, certainly EQ, or emotional intelligence, has been defined by different people and popularized by different people in sort of the popular nomenclature. So whether you're referring to Daniel Goleman in 1995, that seminal book EQ, which everybody sort of treated as the seminal book on EQ, although I think Daniel Goleman has been very open about the fact that he did not, the concept is not something he dropped up, right? But he certainly brought it to the forefront of sort of pop consciousness and talked about it very eloquently. So depending on how you are looking for your definition and who you like as a source, some people say that Maslow in the 50s was the first person to talk about EQ when he talked about emotional strength, which is maybe not the same thing. That's a much different discussion maybe about all the different ways in which one can define emotional intelligence depending on what you're looking at and what the context is and what the question is that you're trying to answer. I think for most of us in 2024, a good working definition of emotional intelligence, and I would maybe say it's lowercase e, lowercase I, so that we're not referring to Daniel Goleman or Maslow or maybe anybody else who lays claim to some of that, definitive power. A good working definition might be one's ability to recognize oneself, to recognize one's own internal experience and differentiate that from the external experience, right? The ability to sort of see oneself and have some awareness of one's filters and one's notions and preconceptions, and how the fact that one can't really transcend one's own subjectivity. Knowing that, having some working awareness of that is probably, I think, the most useful definition we can have of emotional intelligence.
And I know in the workplace...
Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, it does. And I know in the workplace, it's like you get judged more or less based on your level of emotional intelligence, sometimes as a leader in particular. And, it can be hard, to regulate that, because we're humans, we got feelings, right? If we're impacted by something, we're going to react, right?
And they're big.
Yeah. And so sometimes it can be hard to apply that filter or to dampen that down when you're feeling something so strongly in a particular situation and in an environment where you don't want to feel it. How can we exercise those habits a little better so that we're not overreacting in those kind of environments? There's people who cry in the workplace, and that's completely fine. Sometimes you got it. But Like if you really don't want to and you want to be strong and you want to, regulate your emotions a little better, what can you do to sort of get a better hold of it?
Well, can I back up to one thing
Sure.
you said really quickly? Because I thought that was so interesting. You said something about emotional intelligence in the workplace and sort of expectations, right? And the expectations of these environments. And I think it's really important to just note that we have to be careful about the ways in which concepts like emotional intelligence can be weaponized, not intentionally, right? I think most people don't get out of bed in the morning thinking, how can I ruin someone else's day? They get out of bed in the morning thinking, how can I get my needs met, right? Yeah. And so the frequency with which people will invalidate other people's experience by pointing to something like emotional intelligence, and you don't have any because you don't agree with me, or you don't have any because you don't see things the way I do, right, is a little bit of a rough premise. Yeah. It is who's claiming the authority on having emotional intelligence and what that looks like has a lot of sort of small p political implications in any given setting. So I think we have to be really aware that when we talk about having emotional intelligence, the consensus on what that looks like is going to vary based on people's sort of vantage points and their interests, right?
Yeah.
So if it's in somebody's best interest to have a committee, we're talking about workplaces, a committee or a group where nobody dissents, right? Where there's no argument, where there's no pushback, then if you're a person who speaks up, you might be accused of having no emotional intelligence. How can you be so thick as to, how can your emotional intelligence be so low that you would, speak up like that in this kind of setting? It's claiming this authority on how things ought to be when usually those umbrella ideas of how things ought to be are one or two people's ideas about how things ought to be. They're very, very subjective. They do not point to some objective moral framework that everybody has agreed is the way things ought to be. Those are cultures, right? And subcultures. And I'm not saying they're good or bad or right or wrong, but I think we do need to recognize that they are biased and agenda driven and arbitrary and subjective and not objective in terms of the bigger picture.
So getting back to those emotions, how can we regulate ourselves in a space like that?
Yeah, well, that's such an interesting question in light of the question about emotional intelligence, because maybe one question we might have is, do we really care about regulation of the emotions, or do we care about the regulation of the behavior that follows the emotion? That is, if I can, let's just say on a scale of 0 to 10, with 0 being completely peaceful and 10 being, boiling mad, right? If I can experience 10 and not act out inappropriately, is that really a problem? I don't know, right? Do I really need to regulate the feeling if I can regulate how I am showing up and how I am behaving when I'm feeling that way? This is sort of an interesting thing to think about because, the main difference, I would say, between adults and children is adults have learned to have one set of feelings and not act on them or not act them out, right? Whereas children have not learned that yet. A child feels frustrated and temper tantrum, right? Of a certain age. It's down in the aisle 6 of the grocery store, you've got fists and kicking and screaming and all the things, right? Because no popsicles for you, and that's a travesty. Whereas adults, when someone says no popsicles for you, whatever your adult version of popsicles are, you may feel that way. You may internally be having a 2-year-old temper tantrum of the first order. And yet you've learned to do something else out here. Yeah. And I think that's a really interesting thing to think about because it frees us up to not have to regulate our feelings. To say you can have whatever feelings you want. Feelings don't have to be a problem. What becomes, in fact, feelings are rarely a problem. I might say never. What tends to be problematic are the behaviors and actions that flow in a reactionary way from those feelings. So if you're in the workplace and something strikes you as gravely unjust, that's a good feeling. That's a sign that you have values and morals, and that you care about other people and that you care about the right thing. And that's a wonderful sign if you feel outraged when you see something bad happen to someone. I wouldn't want that feeling to go away for someone. Now, after we acknowledge that that's a good feeling based on a moral that is important, right? And the feeling is the result of a disconnect between what's happening and what should be happening on some ethical level. Now we say, okay, well, what's constructive? Because if marching into somebody's office, kicking in the door, and letting someone in a suit have it 11 ways since last Tuesday about how immoral they are is going to be your behavior or your action step in response to that feeling, now we might be in the land of not so constructive. That's probably going to get you booted and have zero impact, whether that's booted in the acute or chronic sense, right? And have zero impact on the thing that you find unjust. So in that sense, acting out that feeling is problematic. It's not having the feeling.
Yeah, agreed. And although I I have seen some 30-somethings, do that temper tantrum in the workplace, and it's not fun.
It's rough. I mean, I think we've all seen in some way or another people from every age group do that because people hit a critical mass point, right, where they're so frustrated, and there, I think, is this deeply human impulse to sort of, and I don't think it's intentional. I don't think people think this through before they do this.
Yeah.
But I think there's this deeply human impulse to have pain and suffering be seen and hope that it will sort of make the point or sort of provide the right messaging in a way that words have failed to do, right? I've sent you 10 carefully worded emails, and politically correct, and had excellent punctuation and bullet lists of the first order, and that's made no impression on you. Perhaps my pain, my suffering will make an impression on you. It will make you see and hear and empathize. In the true meaning of the word empathize, you will feel the pain that I'm feeling because I'm sort of going to unleash it on you, and maybe that will move you. Now, do I think people think that? No, I do not. Do I think people experience a deep desire when they sort of have those behaviors in the workplace to be heard and felt and seen? Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Do I think it's constructive? No, but that wasn't the question.
Yeah, no.
Very human. Very, very human.
Yeah, and I've actually been in training where they take us through like learning about our feelings and our emotions so that we can have better conversations. And the theme that I'm seeing a lot of people that go through this training is they don't know what they're feeling. Like people can't identify, they can't, really explain what they're feeling in their body, and half the time they're not even in their body, so it's kind of like what is happening to me, and anxiety is one of those, isn't it? Like no doubt you would deal with so many people dealing with anxiety, but people label things because they think that's what they're feeling. Sometimes is it what we're feeling? Like could it be something else? Like, and there's that feelings wheel, how they have that wheel of all the different feelings, and it's like,
you can get it on anything too. You can get a feelings wheel on a mug or a pillow or a throat blanket. They'll put that on anything for you. It's pretty great. Deck out your whole home in feelings wheels. It's just a core motif.
Yeah, it's like, what am I feeling today? Let's have a look at the wheel. And this is it. We don't know how many of these emotions we feel a day, do we?
No, and I think it's so interesting you mentioned that, because I noticed that at least half a dozen times a day, I hear somebody utter the words, I feel like, and then they say a thought. It's not a feeling. I feel like that grocery store should be open later. Wait, you said I feel, but then that's not, like, that grocery store should be open later. That's not a feeling. That's a thought. That's a thinking, not a feeling. Yeah. And we've grossly confused thoughts with feelings, probably because we encourage each other to be intellectual and sort of not soulful, I might even say. And feelings identification is not something that we combine any more naturally than using a spoon. You have to be taught, trained to use a spoon, right? And then hopefully you successfully go through your adult life using flatware. And if you don't, it's because you've made that choice, not because you don't know how to use a spoon, right? Most people are fully functional with operating flatware. And the interesting thing about feelings wheels, or anything, for anyone who doesn't know what a feelings wheel is, it's this really pretty, it almost looks like a mandala, a mathematical mandala. And in the middle, you have sort of a circle with 4 quadrants, and you've got the basics, like, I don't remember what they are, but it's like sad, happy, good, bad, or something, right? And then each ring out is broken down into further and further nuances. It gets more and more granular about feelings. So you might have, bad in the 3rd quadrant in the middle, and then by the time you get out to the, 6th ring, you might have betrayed, right? It's a very nuanced, granular feeling in the realm of bad, in the bad feeling quadrant. And those are so helpful for us. And I would say that about anyone, including people who are allegedly more in touch with things, or granular therapists, whoever it is that we think are, dealing in the stock and trade of knowing what feelings look like. I think it's really helpful for all of us, because we are culturally encouraged to sort of dumb down and degranulize our feelings. So the feelings wheels are incredible. To your point about not knowing at any given time what we're feeling, I think that's absolutely true. And I think it comes from a couple of different places. One is generally not being well taught to be granular, not having a good vocabulary with which to label and identify and recognize, oh, that's what I'm feeling right now, right? Beyond bad, sad, good, mad, happy. Secondly, I think there's a pretty strong influence in the West about what feelings are acceptable and what feelings aren't. And that further discourages the investigation of that vocabulary about those sort of unacceptable patterns. Like, you shouldn't need 15 granular words for frustrated, because you shouldn't be frustrated. So just don't worry about it, kind of an attitude. And that's hard on people, because then they don't have a way to recognize and explain to themselves what's happening internally. Something that I find very powerful and moving about work in anger management in particular, and I'm very interested in this work, is that I have yet to meet, and I don't specialize in anger management, so I'm not qualified to speak for the whole population by any stretch of the imagination. But in my experience, I have yet to meet a person who had an anger problem, no matter how much they insisted they had an anger problem. I've met people who have shame problems, and I've met people who have anxiety, and I've met people who have a number of other things that all come out as anger, but it's not an anger problem. I haven't met one of those folks yet.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
I find that incredibly indicative.
Yeah, it's almost like an after effect, isn't it?
It's a symptom.
Yeah.
It's a surface level symptom. And, anger is an interesting example, because anger is a powerful feeling. Anger feels forceful. Anger feels strong. And it is usually a absolute direct pendulum swing from feelings of feeling powerless. And the feelings that fall into those categories. And anger just feels so much better for most people.
Yeah.
It has very destructive consequences, but in the moment, it's, and I'm not saying that people are picking this, intentionally, but it feels better than a lot of those other feelings. And it's nameable. Right? It's a lot. I mean, it's very interesting to me, the number of people who say, I have an anger problem. You don't understand. I have an anger problem. And if you go like, okay, you have an anger problem. Sure. What else bothers you? Nothing. Ooh, that can't be. Right? Like, it's a very easy one to point to, because it's one that's culturally acceptable and one that we put on people.
Yeah. And what you got me thinking there is, we don't get taught this in school as kids. We get the very basics, the center of that wheel. But anything beyond that, we're not really taught how to identify that, how to articulate that, and we get to 30s, 40s, and we still have no clue. Why are we not learning this stuff sooner when we're kids so that we can be more in touch with what we're experiencing in this meat suit that we're in?
I love that. Yes. It's a great question. And I think there's probably a lot of different answers depending on who you ask and where you're asking, what the small p politics are of the given context in which you're asking. One 500,000 foot level view might be that there's probably I don't know, I call it a cultural current. Maybe I want to be careful about ascribing things where I'm assigning them to, that says it's not important. That says that's not important for success. What's important for success is that you work hard and that you have this, and this quality, and you can do this, and this, but that's not one of them.
Yeah.
It's not really something we prioritize. And certainly we could make some maybe general observations about some traditional sort of gender roles and who Western society thinks ought to be like what, and which people we encourage to be like what. I hate to say it, but the cliche truth is that most females have a better vocabulary, a wider vocabulary of feelings words than males. Why is that? Because we generally teach men that they're not supposed to have those. There are lots of places in the world that are very enlightened and progressive. If that's what you want to call it. That's judgmental of me to call it enlightened and progressive, but I will. And there are a lot of places where those currents kind of persist. And I don't think it's intentional. I don't think there is a conspiracy to keep, one group of people talking about their feelings and the other group not. I just think that these are old, entrenched cultural patterns that are very subtle, quite frankly. They're very, very subtle. And so they're hard to target.
Yeah, and I love your point there about, I guess it's not of value for success, because really if we're in better touch with ourselves and our emotions and our feelings, we can have better conversations, we can have better relationships, we can actually have a better success path in life. And really, if we can get down to that level, it impacts everything in life, doesn't it?
Oh, 100%. And I think the great irony is, again, we have to be a little skeptical, perhaps is the right word, about or critically analytical, right, about whose success we're talking about, right? Like who benefits and who doesn't benefit from having more of that education and less. And I think those are pretty culturally loaded questions, right, that are maybe beyond the scope of this conversation. But I think it is worth, tipping the hat to the fact that going back to whose idea of emotional intelligence, right?
Yeah.
Like, are we weaponizing these things in different contexts based on certain agendas? And I don't mean that to sound conspiratorial at all. I'm just saying that every context has an agenda, right? Like every committee has an agenda. That's what they're there for, to get a certain set of things done, right? And every corporation has an agenda. It does whatever it does. Like people, individuals, groups of people, organizations all have agendas. Agenda doesn't have to be a bad word, right? We're sort of used to, agenda's taken on this strange connotation of like, oh, they have an agenda.
Yeah.
Everybody's got a purpose, whether you call it a purpose or an agenda or raison d'etre. I mean, it's just like the way it is, yeah? And some ways of being in the world are more counter to those agendas, raison d'etre, missions, visions, whatever you want to call it, than others. It just occurred to me that, it's in nonprofit organizations that we call it mission and vision. And in corporations, we call it purpose, or goal or objective or something. I don't know. I have to think through that, but it's kind of funny to think about.
Yeah. And just those words alone, they're quite heavily loaded, aren't they? Like in terms of feeling and emotion that come with them.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
And words have power.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
One of those words that I want to talk to you about is anxiety. Now, I did raise it a little bit ago, but are you seeing people are more anxious nowadays, particularly since the pandemic?
More anxious. That's such an interesting question. I'm going to tentatively say yes,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not completely sure. And the reason I'm not completely sure is that the other thing that has happened in the last 5 years is the discussion about destigmatizing mental health concerns has also gotten more traction. So people are also talking about it more. And there's a lot more attention and dollars and public support and celebrity awareness and these sorts of things on things like anxiety and being open about your anxiety. So I don't know if people are more anxious or they're more comfortable talking about it.
Do you think people know what that is now? Like, do people know what anxiety is?
I think everybody knows what their own anxiety looks like. Now, maybe there's a little bit of an unfair, it's the same word, whether I use it to talk about what makes me anxious or you use it to talk about what makes you anxious, or somebody in the West Bank right now talks about it to refer to what makes them anxious, right? Those are probably three very different anxieties, but we all use the word anxiety, right? So it's an interesting question, right? Like, do I define everybody else's anxiety relative to my own? Is mine completely, only exclusively relative to me? It generally, I think we can agree, it generally refers to a state in which people feel uncertain, an unpleasant state in which people feel uncertain. We could use the word nervous. We could use the word anticipatory, unsettled. The characteristics tend to be similar, even if the context and subject to object are different. And we could call it a state of physiological arousal, right? That leads to a certain sort of set of thought patterns, thinking patterns, feeling patterns that then enters a feedback loop with that physiological arousal. So that model would be true whether you are in a war zone or whether you are anxious about a check clearing, right? We could say that the cycle is the same, although one may be much bigger, much more intense, any one of the number of things. We could say the shape is still the same.
Yeah.
The cycle stages are the same.
And essentially it's rooted in fear, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, anxiety is the human critter's way of staying alive. It's as old as we are. It's older than we are, right? Anxiety is our way of recognizing potential threats in the environment and erring on the side of caution, right? So if the earliest of us, whatever that looks like, was skipping through the savannah and heard a rustle behind a tree and thought to itself, oh, that's probably a really friendly zebra, that individual probably got eaten, right? And maybe not, but the ones who went, oh God, what's that, never got eaten, right? So the biological processes that make up anxiety are as old as time because they are survival processes, right? And as our frontal lobes have evolved and now we can tell ourselves very interesting stories about our anxiety, it's maybe gotten a little different. But the mechanisms are all the same. And yes, they're all about fear. And really the only fear is, or Dr. once put it, the only anxiety is death anxiety. And still true.
Yeah. And it's not funny, but it's interesting how we've evolved, from caveman times to now, where that anxiety or that fear can be driven by such trivial things now, like the littlest things. And I find that, having a reframe of the mindset really helps get out of that state, particularly if you're finding yourself feeling anxious. It's just like putting things into perspective and having a reframe sometimes can really help. What kind of techniques do you use with people to help them get out of that state?
So the state of sort of being actively anxious. Yeah. One of my favorite things to do is I've named it fear capturing. And let me explain what I mean by that. Most people, and maybe you could sort of tell us your experience with this as just sort of an example, find that when they try and work with something that's in their head, it just keeps morphing, right? An anxious thought, like it's like a multi-headed hydra, right?
Yep.
You can sort of latch onto one part and it springs five more aspects and five more what ifs, and then over here and over there and all over the place. Thoughts, anxious thoughts, but thoughts in general are all sort of like wet bars of soap. The harder you try and squeeze them, the faster they ricochet out of your hand, crack the wall, smash you in the face, and then like club you in the toe when they hit the floor, right? Like trying to get a hold of a thought is literally a slippery business. And so trying to work with an anxious thought in thought form is incredibly frustrating. So I like to capture fears or anxious fears literally by using ink, old school ink, the back of a receipt, back of a cocktail napkin, back of your hand, whatever you've got. You grab a pen and write it down, because the minute you write it down, you have contained it. It can no longer, unless that is a magic ink pen, and I do mean really magic, the sentence you've just written down that describes your fear is not going to spawn 50 more sort of like dimensions as it would if you kept it in your head. So once you write it down, you've contained it. It can't turn into 50 other things that now you have to deal with. And secondly, once you've written it down, you can start to work with it in a way that you can't when it's in your head. You can start to look at it and ask yourself some questions about truth and falseness and belief and matter of degree. You can reality test it. You can sort of poke some holes in it. You can ask yourself all sorts of helpful questions like, well, is that true? Is it 10% true? Is it 40% true? Is it unknown? Do we have no idea? Is it just like all the other thoughts in your head all day long that you don't really know, but those ones aren't bothering you at this time, right? We have lots of things in our heads at any given time we don't have resolution to. They're just not bothering us at that moment, so we're not hyper focusing on them. Yeah? So capturing your thoughts, and it's interesting because this is not the same as journaling. I'm going to be very explicit about that. Journaling for many people, exacerbates the anxiety because they're hyper focusing and hyper ruminating on the anxiety, and they're actually adding details to the fear fantasy. They're fleshing out this horror movie that they've got in their head by journaling, and now they're sort of reinforcing it to themselves, which is the opposite of helpful, right? So this is not journaling. It's simply capturing or containing the fear thought in writing so that you can work with it, so that you can see it, so that it's not this slippery thing going all over. The other thing that happens when you put anxious thoughts, let's call them, in writing, is when you're looking at them, you start to see choices much more clearly than when it's washing around between your ears. You can kind of look at it and go like, wait a second, is this just going to resolve itself maybe? Maybe there's actually nothing I need to do. I've been fretting about it, but as it turns out, this is a self-licking ice cream cone. This is going to go away anyway. I don't have to worry about this. And we can't do that when they're in our heads because they get so intertwined with other thoughts, other concerns, and then also feelings.
That is such a great idea, and you know, you reminded me of one of the techniques that they use for getting rid of limiting beliefs, where you basically put it down and you go, is it true? And you just keep going till it's gone, and that just takes a big thing, makes it so small, and literally it's gone because you're not giving it the weight that it had previously. And also, you know, I love your comment there about thoughts being like a slippery bar of soap. Like, you know, as a meditation teacher, I teach people that their thoughts are just clouds. They're just going to float on by and there'll be another one in a minute, you know. So it's really how you identify that and the weight that you give it. And if you can just realize that they're just things that slip on by, they just are less weighty on you.
Yes. And you know, where most of us, myself included, sort of get into trouble, where we get into the sticky zone, is when we mistake a thought for the way things are. So we have a thought about the way things are. It's related to the way things are, right? It's not completely random, but it's not the same as the way things are. So, like, let's use a fun example. Just lottery tickets in Australia?
Yeah.
Like lottery tickets?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So just checking.
Yeah.
Okay. So, like every time I buy a lottery ticket, and I don't want you to think that's too often, but occasionally I do, I get a kick out of the $1 lottery ticket. I have the thought, the minute it's in my paw, and look, I wasn't born yesterday. I just want to put that out there before I say what I'm about to say. I have the thought when I'm holding that ticket.
Yeah, we all do.
Yeah, thank you. It just pops right in there. That's a thought that suddenly becomes, even though I know that's not true, all of a sudden it feels true. It feels deeply true. It feels really, really deeply true. And that's okay as long as I don't act on that confused truth. Because if you're holding a lottery ticket in your hand and you go, it feels like a winner, I'm having the thought that it's a winner. Ergo, you roll next door and I don't know, buy a boat that's $2 million that you definitely can't write a check for unless you win the right?
Yeah.
That's a problem because you've now fused a thought about reality with reality itself, and you've acted according to this made up reality that you have. And that's sort of an extreme example, but it's shocking how often during the course of the day we all do this. So we sort of might have a thought like, oh, and it usually starts out fairly innocuous, oh gosh, I hope on that phone call that I didn't, when I said XYZ, I hope that didn't ruffle so-and-so's feathers, right? And it sort of starts out as a low level to 1 out of 10 on the distress level, right? And then we think about it a little more. And the more we think about it, the more we go, gosh, I really might have. I don't know. Did she say bye to me before she hung up the phone? Did she ask me? I don't think she did. Oh, she's upset. And before you know it, we've taken a thought about how things might be. She might be upset with you. It's a possibility. And all of a sudden she's upset with me. And we've worked ourselves into the state of absolute despair because we've overly fused, the ACT folks call it fusion, when we don't recognize a thought as a thought and we start to treat thoughts as the capital T truth about reality. And then we have the corresponding emotional, physiological response as if that reality were the reality. It would be a little bit like sitting in a movie theater, and I don't know, I don't watch horror movies, but I like this example. You're sitting in a movie theater and you're watching, a slasher film or something, but you're eating popcorn and Raisinets. Now, no one ever, I hope, actually saw somebody get murdered and ate popcorn and Raisinets at the same time. But even though you've got popcorn and Raisinets anchoring you to reality, telling you that you're just in a movie theater and this is all fake and you're slurping on a Coca-Cola and your friends are sitting on either side of you, blah, 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 blah. Regardless of those anchors to reality, you're still getting adrenaline pump off watching this crazy, scary movie. Like your body, my body, anybody's body does not know the difference between imaginary thought land and real land, which is why things like horror movies or thrillers or any of these movies that produce like really profound, reactions, emotional reactions and sort of body experiences work so well. If we could recognize that it was just a movie, you'd walk out and go, yawn, and nobody would see those movies, right? Because they wouldn't quote work, meaning they wouldn't elicit that response in you. The truth is we go through most of our days acting just like everything's a horror movie. We're having these visceral responses to stories, to imaginary stories that we've created in our own head. They're not playing out on a movie screen. They're playing out on the little projector screen we have up here in the noggin.
Something curious came into my head when you were explaining that, and it was, our thoughts, feelings, behaviors can also play a part in manifestation and what we bring into our life. I know I'm going to get a little bit woo-woo here with you, but What's your thoughts in that realm? Like, if we're that powerful with our thoughts and our feelings and our emotions, we can actually bring certain things into our life. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, for me, I would actually say it's not woo-woo at all. I would say it's actually very real. And by that, I mean, let's go back to the example of making up a story or getting, sort of attached to a story that someone's mad at you.
Yep.
Okay. And they're not. Or maybe they're a little miffed, but you don't know, right? You don't know because you haven't asked them. You're just going down this road of like, oh God, I've aggravated that person to no end. This is it. I'm getting fired. Whatever your storyline is, right? When we, and again, the ACT people call this fusion. When we fuse with a story or a thought that we've made up, when we start experiencing the anxiety in our body of like, oh, she's mad at me, even though you're the one making up the story that she's mad at you, right? She hasn't said that. Nobody said that. You're the only one who's saying that. Yeah. When we start to experience things in that real way in response to imaginary narratives, we are also likely to start acting in response to those imaginary narratives. So let's just play this one out. This example, you've made up your mind and fused with the idea that this person is mad at you. You're desperately trying to figure out what you do. Next thing you know, you're like pounding down their door to get in there and apologize, falling over yourself, looking like a crazy person. And this person's going, sorry, what? And you're like, I'm so sorry because I just want you to know that I didn't mean to da-da-da-da-da-da. And they're going, because they were never upset with you in the first place, right? Now, that's a pretty low-level example, right? Because if the awkwardest thing any of us ever do is apologize to somebody for something that doesn't need apologizing for, okay, fine. No big deal. I think we'll all be fine. But it takes on different sort of dimensions and meanings when we think about how we react aggressively, perhaps when we think we've been hurt, or when we fuse with the idea that someone's done us wrong, or we feel indignant or injustice, and we have emotionally fused with that story without checking it out. Saying like, that person was trying to hurt me is a thought, and it could be true. It's one of many things that could be true, right? But when we hone in on that one and fuse with it and start to have all the physiological processes that kick off when we feel hurt or incensed or indignant, that is more likely to drive accordingly aggressive behaviors. Now you're kicking in that person's office door and saying things that may have ramifications. So I don't think it's woo-woo or manifesting. I think it's called absolute 100% predictable natural consequences of fusing with something that evokes or elicits a certain emotional response in you.
Yeah. No,
and then acting that out in the real world, even though it was all in your head.
Yeah, it's a powerful thing, isn't it? Now, if people want to find out more about what you do and get in touch with you, where can they go?
They are welcome to visit my website. It's Onward Psych Services. That's PSYCH services.com. I'm also on Instagram. I really relish making what I call practical, tactical reels with little nuggets, most of which are about thinking and how to negotiate difficult thoughts and feelings, and quite frankly, the difficulty of being human and trying to reconcile all these things that sort of run through our heads 24/7, whether it's convenient or not, and whether we need it or not, or we like it or not. So I'm always delighted to hear from people through my website, through Instagram.
Now, do you deal with people globally as well, not just in the States?
So I'm licensed to do therapy in 9 U.S. states. I have not explored. There are some really interesting ins and outs of practicing abroad, right? Depending on where it is internationally and reciprocity and those sorts of things. So I'm certainly open to exploring that with folks. I certainly don't at this point have a roster of places that I'm able to practice abroad. It's just a pretty extensive process to go through and figure out sort of like country by country, right? What all that looks like. I do speak nationally and internationally on bespoke topics like practical, tactical stress management. That's one of my favorites. Go talk to big groups of people, and we do demonstrations and lots of volunteer stuff. Do it for a lot of corporate organizations, professional organizations, organizations whose professionals need CEUs, continuing education type stuff. Also do one on the importance of saying no and how to have a better life through saying no. They're mainly interactive workshops and presentations that really emphasize quality of life skills that people can actionize immediately with no special dedicated carve out time or equipment or outfit or location or anything.
I love that.
Because that most of us would be doing more for ourselves if we could figure out how to cram it in. And I don't want cramming it in to become an additional daunting sort of source of stress for people.
Yeah, I love that. Sounds like you do it all, which is amazing. Now, the next question I'm going to ask you, I've asked this to hundreds of people around the world, and given your passion for change, I'm eager to hear what your answer is. What's the change you'd like to see in the world, and how can we bring it to life?
Oh, I love that. I love that so much. I'm so glad you asked people this. That's great because it gets people thinking, right? And when people listen to other people thinking through that question, it gets them thinking. The change I would like to see is people, well, I guess it has two parts. One is a mindset change, and the second is the action following the mindset. The mindset that I would like people to consider cultivating is one that we all as individuals have remarkable ripple effect on the people around us. And I think in a world where so many things are so big and so wrong and seem so broken, it's so understandably easy to slide into this feeling of helplessness and smallness and a sense that, what can I do? I'm one person on the other side of the globe from that thing. How can I possibly have an impact? And to slide into this real sense of, I don't know if I'd call it nihilism, but definitely despair about our individual level efficacy to have change. And what I would say is, if we all slowed down and thought about moments in our lives where people impacted us, we would remember how impactful we can be with others. Because we have all had moments of profound meaning and impact that were small but huge. And I think if we could shift to that mindset that you don't have to be an aid worker or a philanthropist with bazillions of dollars to spend, or an organization or any of those things, if you can show up for the people around you with kindness and grace and compassion and tolerance, and if you can model being human and model walking through the difficulties of being human with as much grace as possible, which we all struggle with, and let other people see by your example that it's okay to struggle. It's really okay. We're all in the same boat together. Then you will have profound impact on the people around you, and they will go on to have profound impacts of the same magnitude on the people on them. And if we can think of it as sort of planting a garden without expecting to see the trees, right? Somebody's got to drop the seeds. And the more seeds, the more trees, right? And the fact that you don't get to see the trees doesn't mean they won't be there. You got to trust in that, right?
I love that.
So I would encourage people then to really actionize kindness all the time, all day long, every day, whether it's necessary or unnecessary, because it's always necessary.
Yes. Amen. I love that. And, when I started this show, the theme that came out of that last question is that it all begins with us. And no matter what change we want to create, it starts with us. We got to look in the mirror. And That's basically all the conversations that we're having. It all comes back to that. So thank you so much for being a part of the Ethical Evolution.
Thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you again for the work you're doing at your organization. I hope you're really proud of what you guys are doing. It's amazing.
Thanks for listening to the Ethical Evolution podcast. If you're ready to be the change and would love to work with me on finding your voice through spiritual coaching or creating your own podcast with impact, visit ethicalchangeagency.com. If you're enjoying the show, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. It's growing every day with great content and highlights you may not have heard on the podcast. In addition, please subscribe to the podcast on Spotify or Apple, and why not leave a 5-star review? If you're not following me on social media, you can find me at Ethical Change Agency on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook and YouTube, and at DJ Bindi on TikTok and Instagram.
Hi everyone, I'm Geraldine Glass, a leader in the field of music as medicine, and I'm excited to share with you my newest release of healing sound, Pentatonic Visions, with Chris Scholler and Electrocast Records. Immerse yourself in ethereal realms where the harmonies of nature, tribal rhythms, and soundscapes blend with the crystal singing bowls. It's out now, streaming on all platforms.
Dreaming of the perfect event or longing for a clutter-free space? I'm Stephanie with I'm with Steph, where your vision becomes a reality. From magical weddings to transformative home organizing, we bring you expertise and passion to every project. Whether you're planning a grand celebration or seeking peace through organization, we tailor our services to meet your unique needs. I'm with Steph. To explore our services and connect with me directly, visit imwithsteph.com. Mention Electrocast for a 20% discount. Electrocast.